do have some questions, and they really go to the environmental review, and it's really a series of questions whether you're going to look at these aspects. One is, will there be any analysis of whether this amount of power is actually needed for the ERCOT grid? Two, will there be an analysis of the financial cost of building the plant, and who will bear that cost? Is that part of your analysis? Will there be an analysis of the waste stream and what's going to happen to all of that nuclear waste at the end of both the existing plants and the new plants, since with 40 years we've never ever found a place to put any of that waste? Will there be analysis of worker safety and public health? Will there be an analysis of the full uranium cycle from the mining to the processing to the enrichment, and then finally, as I already mentioned, to the disposal of the waste? And finally, will there be any analysis of how climate change might change the hydrological balance that's in this region? And let me say, I love this town. I have two boys. We come here to Dinosaur Valley State Park and to Fossil Rim all the time, and I just love your community, and I'm happy to be here. Thanks.
Okay, those questions cover both safety aspects and environmental. Barry, do you want to, since you have a great overview of all this, you want to, and I have the list, but if you have a list there, go ahead.
I'm taking Steve's list. Most of what you've asked certainly will be within the scope of the environmental review. Things like the fuel cycle, I would encourage you, number one, to look at the regulatory framework that we have for conducting our review. It's not just the rules that we have in our Code of Federal Regulations that talk about the combined license review process or the standard design review process. We have regulatory guidance, Steve touched upon it earlier, such as a safety standard review plan, as well as an environmental standard review plan. And these are easily accessible from the NRC's website, nrc.gov. Look for SRP, Standard Review Plan. There are document numbers, so I would encourage you to look at New Reg 0800, which is on the safety side, and New Reg 1555, which is how we will conduct our environmental review. Matters such as the fuel cycle. Where do you get the fuel to be used in this facility? From the mining, the milling, the manufacturing, the enrichment, all of that is part of our review process. And within our own regulatory framework, we try and treat some issues generically, so they don't have to be dealt with on a site-specific basis. I can get very specific in terms of regulations. For example, 10 CFR 51.51 is exactly where we deal with the fuel cycle impacts. So that information is already in our regulations, and it will also be reflected in the environmental impact statement. Matters such as global climate change, the upcoming issues that are contemporary today. As the field evolves and we get better understanding of what these issues are, we have to look at issues like that. So the agency, even though we may not have in the past, we have to look at the contemporary issues that are important, that reflect change in how we look at the issues. So global climate change and potential effects, let's say increased water levels, are issues that we have to consider along the way during the lifetime of the operation of this facility. Need for power. The NRC doesn't set rates. The NRC is not a state public utility commission that is involved in decisions like that. Nevertheless, to advance authorization for an action that could result in land disturbance, the NRC has to have confidence that the public good would come out of this exercise. So we have, as part of our benefits assessment, the need for power analysis. It's not the same as the PUCs, that is a state responsibility, but we have to consider what the benefits would be, which would be the production of electricity, against the environmental costs that would be incurred. So that's part of the benefits assessment that we would consider.
I'm sorry, my question was more, do you analyze whether if the plant was built, the demand would be there to actually purchase? See what I'm saying? So that there's an analysis of whether the plant is truly needed to meet the demands for the Texas market.
I understand that, and part of, you heard one comment from Case that power needs in the country by 2030 need to grow by 25%, conceivably by 2040, 50% above what the current electrical power production is today in the United States. Texas is a growing economy. The needs of Texas, obviously with the interest in not just Comamche Peak, but also the South Texas project. We also have a potential project a little further south, Victoria area, out in West Texas. There is need for power in the state of Texas. Ultimate decisions regarding construction, remember they're asking for an authorization, such as you want a driver's license, you go through the exercise. Nobody's going to force you to drive an automobile.
I still have to buy a car.
I understand that. But when you decide to buy the car, when you decide to drive, is your determination. But you can't drive without the driver's license. And these utilities, these power companies are asking authorization from the NRC to go ahead with construction when they choose to go ahead with construction. When their economic evaluation of the need for power is there to justify the investment. So part of this is getting the authorization doesn't mean there's going to be construction. It means there can be construction.
And then my other question had to do with, do you look at the total cost of the plant and whether economically it makes sense, you know, how they will pay for that plant and who ultimately bears the cost of that plant all the way through decommissioning?
Yeah, that is not entirely within the agency's authority, but within the benefit balancing, we have to understand what the investment has to be, the benefit would be, what the environmental cost would be. So we do go through part of the economic analysis. We have economists, we have socioeconomics, specialists also working on these projects. But I would encourage you to look at the environmental standard review plan and the kinds of environmental impact statements that we have written for matters like this, such as the early site limits that we've already processed. These are the kinds of issues that make up part of our environmental review. It is holistic, it looks at all these issues to try and do the informed decision making that we have to do. Our fundamental responsibility is safety, but the environmental review informs that safety decision and it considers these factors.
And Barry, since Cyrus just mentioned it, I think it's important for people to hear this. Could someone talk about who pays how what the framework is for making sure that the money is there for decommissioning?
Okay, under the NRC's regulations, the resources need to be set aside on a continuing basis. Once this plant goes into operation, the resources are set aside to decommission the facility. There may be some other kinds of industries where resources are not set aside. We're looking at abandoned industrial facilities all across the United States. That doesn't happen in nuclear power industry. We actually have a decommissioning trust fund forecasting based upon the operating life of these facilities, what the needs are to be set aside, untouchable until they begin the decommissioning process. We may have requests for early access to those funds and the commission ultimate decision. But the reality is there is a decommissioning trust fund set aside so that these plants, after their life of operation, whether or not they get renewed licenses, will ultimately be returned to public use. That the lands would be available for unrestricted or restricted use for some future activity after the use of the land for power production.
And it's funded by the licensee?
It's funded by the license holder.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Barry.